Welcome to our channel, all friends. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe my channel and press the bell icon to stay update for new videos. Thanks. Let's start new video. My mobile balance had run out. My mother was talking to me about something, but the call got disconnected, and I started feeling restless. I wondered what she was about to tell me. I kept waiting for her to call back, but her call didn't come. So I went to my father-in-law's room to get the mobile. He was busy on his phone at that time. He was staring at the phone without blinking, as if he was completely absorbed in it. When I went to him and asked for the phone, he suddenly jumped as if a scorpion had stung him. His reaction startled me. When I asked him for the phone, he flatly refused, saying, "I can't give you the phone right now. I'm doing something very important." I was shocked and confused. What could be so important that he couldn't give me the phone for even 2 minutes? His refusal made me angry, and I went back to my room. I kept thinking about his behavior. I felt disrespected. It seemed like he was looking at something inappropriate on his phone, which is why he got so nervous when he saw me suddenly. But then, when I remembered his beard and his pious nature, I hesitated to think anything wrong about him. He was a very religious man who prayed 5 times a day. I shook off my thoughts and even repented for thinking such things about him. How could such a good and noble person do anything wrong? I pushed the thought away. Then my mother called again. Hearing that she was fine gave me peace of mind. At night, when I was sleeping in my room, the door opened and my father-in-law came in to charge his phone. As soon as he entered, I woke up. My husband was sound asleep at that time. I didn't like the fact that my father-in-law came into our room at night to charge his phone. He did this every night, charging his phone for a while and then taking it back. I didn't know when he came and went because I was usually asleep. Sometimes his movements woke me up, but most of the time I remained asleep. This was something I couldn't even discuss with my husband, but I often wondered why he had to charge his phone in our room when there were so many other places in the house, including his own room. At first I kept this question to myself, but one day I asked my husband about it. He said, "It's just an excuse to charge the phone. My father loves me very much and has always slept near me. He just comes to see me at night. Don't worry about it, and don't ever stop him from doing this." Hearing this, I stayed quiet, thinking he must be right. Surely my father-in-law came to the room out of love for his son. What else could be the reason? But it still felt strange to me. I started sleeping more cautiously, making sure my clothes were tidy and my body was covered with a blanket. I didn't want my father-in-law to see me in a disheveled state. That night, I had covered myself completely with the blanket. When I woke up, I was shocked to see that the blanket had fallen to the floor, my clothes were disheveled, and my father-in-law's phone was lying a short distance away, still charging. I was confused. Throughout the day, he wouldn't let the phone out of his sight for even a second, keeping it on silent and staring at it in his room. But at night, he would leave it charging in our room. Many times I thought to myself, why don't I check his phone to see what he's hiding? But then I would push the thought away, thinking that if my father-in-law or husband found out, they would be angry with me. So I always dismissed the idea. Now, this strange routine had become a daily occurrence. I would wrap myself tightly in the blanket before sleeping, but when I woke up, the blanket would be lying far away from me, and my clothes would be disheveled. Seeing this, I would feel ashamed. I would wonder if my father-in-law had come into the room and seen me like that, and what he must have thought. The thought alone made me feel so embarrassed that I wished I could disappear. I decided that from now on, I would only sleep after he left the room, but I couldn't succeed. Eventually, I would get tired and fall asleep. Tonight, I stayed awake for a long time, but finally, sleep overcame me. When I fell asleep, I woke up to a strange sensation, as if someone was touching me. Startled, I sat up abruptly. My father-in-law was standing very close to me. I was completely stunned. My clothes were in a strange state again. When I saw him so close, I panicked. I started wondering who had touched me. Was it my father-in-law, or was it my husband's hand, since he was also lying close to me? My father-in-law noticed me and immediately stepped back. He said, "You should sleep more properly. It's not appropriate for girls to sleep so carelessly. Many impure things become attracted and start troubling them." Hearing this, I felt ashamed and tried to explain myself, but he interrupted, saying, "Be more careful in the future. I don't need any explanations from you." After that, I started staying awake until he left the room, and only then would I sleep. But today I lost the battle against sleep again, and the same thing happened. I woke up to that strange sensation, and there he was, standing close to me. He repeated the same words as before. Now I was deep in thought. What was he doing near me? He should have charged his phone and left. But why was he standing so close to me? I couldn't discuss this with my husband because he would get angry and think I was turning him against his father. I didn't want that to happen, but a doubt had settled in my heart. Something was wrong with my father-in-law, and on top of that, he always kept his phone with him. Today, while talking to my mother, the call got disconnected again. I went to my father-in-law's room to get the phone, but he was in the bathroom. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. So I picked up his phone. As soon as I unlocked it, I saw some strange and disturbing videos. In one or two videos, I thought I saw my face somewhere. Before I could check further, my father-in-law suddenly snatched the phone from my hand. He was extremely angry and said, "Don't you know it's wrong to touch someone's phone without their permission?" I felt ashamed and tried to explain, "I just wanted to call my mother, so I picked up the phone." He flatly refused and said, "I don't have any balance either. How can you call your mother from my phone?" Then I went back to my room. I started thinking, why did my father-in-law have to be so cold and harsh just because of the phone? He could have explained it to me calmly. What was he hiding in his phone? Then the thought crossed my mind again. Why did I feel like I saw my face in one of the videos? I couldn't say for sure because I hadn't looked at it carefully. I decided that tonight, when my father-in-law came to charge his phone, I would clear my doubts. And that's exactly what happened. At night, when my father-in-law came to charge his phone and left, I knew he would return in half an hour. So I sat up in my place, and as soon as his phone turned on, I immediately opened the gallery folder. When I opened the video, I felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under my feet, because there, in the video, were my husband and I. I was very young when my father passed away. My mother took me to my grandmother's house. My mother would cry all the time, remembering my father because he had taken great care of her and loved her deeply. That's why his loss was so painful for her. My grandmother pressured her to remarry, but my mother refused. She said, "I don't know if a new husband will accept my daughter or how he will treat her." I've seen that men often don't accept their wife's children from a previous marriage, and even if they do, they hesitate to fulfill their needs. Sometimes I hear such strange and horrifying stories that my soul shudders. That's why I don't want to remarry and bring trouble upon myself and my daughter. Eventually, my grandparents also passed away. My mother got a job at a school. She was educated, and with the recommendation of one of my grandfather's friends, she got a government school job. Our life started going well. My father's sudden death had made my mother very sensitive about me. She would worry about me whenever I was outside the house and would only feel at ease when I returned home. She paid attention to even the smallest details about me and cared for me so much that it sometimes made me feel guilty. When I completed my education, my mother arranged my marriage after careful consideration. She chose a family where there was only my husband and father-in-law. She said, usually problems in a household arise because of mothers-in-law and sisters-in-law. Here, there's only your husband and father-in-law. I'm sure you won't face any issues in this house. I also thought the same and moved into my in-laws' house. I had no problems with my husband. In fact, he took great care of me. I loved him deeply. He never raised his voice at me, and his tone was always filled with love and gentleness. However, my father-in-law's behavior sometimes confused me. He would look at me with strange eyes and occasionally touch me in an odd way, which left me shocked and disturbed. There was no one I could share this with. I was even afraid to talk to my mother about it because she would get overly worried and upset, and her health would deteriorate. I didn't want to trouble her, so I dismissed these thoughts as mere imagination. But now, when I got hold of my father-in-law's phone and saw what was on it, my eyes were wide open in shock. What I saw on the phone turned me into a stone statue. I couldn't even imagine that my father-in-law could do something like this, especially with his daughter-in-law and son. Just then, I heard the sound of the door opening. I quickly turned off the phone and placed it back where it was. But at that very moment, my father-in-law entered the room and saw me putting the phone down. He stared at my face intently, trying to read my expression. But without saying a word, he picked up the phone and left the room. Even after he left, the videos kept playing in my mind. I hadn't gotten enough time to delete them or tell my husband about them. I knew that unless my husband saw the evidence with his own eyes, he wouldn't believe me. After all, the person I was about to accuse was none other than his father. How could he tolerate such a thing being said about his own dad? After that incident, my father-in-law became even more careful with his phone. He didn't let it out of his sight for even a second. The most surprising thing was that he started charging his phone in his own room. Perhaps he was afraid that his secret would be exposed. When my husband asked me about it, I pretended not to know anything. I didn't want to bring it up without solid proof. Later, when my husband asked my father-in-law about it, I don't know what he told him, but after that, my husband was furious with me. He said, "My father is like a father to you too. You have no right to disrespect him." I was shocked and didn't understand what he was talking about. Then he said, "Why did you tell my father that he disturbs your privacy and that he shouldn't come into the room at night?" I shook my head in denial and tried to convince him that I had never said such a thing. But my husband only got angrier and said, "Are you trying to say that my old father is lying? That he's making false accusations against you?" This was the first time I had seen my husband so angry, and I didn't know how to calm him down or clear up the misunderstanding. I felt sorry for my father-in-law, who was trying to cover up his own sins by blaming me. Perhaps he was afraid that I would reveal his true nature to my husband, so he lied to him first. Now I had to be very careful. I was terrified because if my husband reacted so strongly to such a small issue, what would he do if I told him the truth about his father? He might even divorce me and throw me out of the house. Without evidence, I couldn't say anything. I knew I had to act quickly, but I couldn't get my hands on my father-in-law's phone. A couple of times when he was in the bathroom, I tried to take his phone, but it was locked, so I had to put it back. I wanted to tell my husband the truth, but I didn't know how to do it. Meanwhile, my father-in-law started harassing me openly. I was alone at home all day, and he would come and go, teasing me, trying to touch me. I couldn't tell my husband about this. I started avoiding him, but he became even more aggressive. I was terrified that he might try to force himself on me. Now, after my husband left for the office, I started going to my mother's house. Seeing my pale and troubled face, my mother became worried and asked me the reason. I brushed it off by saying I wasn't feeling well. I didn't want to tell her the truth and make her more upset. One day when I returned home, my husband was furious. He said, "What kind of drama are you creating? You keep running to your mother's house every day. Don't you know my old father stays hungry and alone at home?" I didn't get married so that my wife would run away to her mother's house every day. I married you so that my father could live comfortably in his old age. Hearing this, I started crying. How could I tell him what his father was doing to me? My husband wasn't ready to listen or understand. Now I was forced to stay at home, but after finishing the chores, I would lock myself in the room. My father-in-law would knock on the door repeatedly, asking me to open it. I would cry and pray to Allah for help. One day, while I was busy with household work, my father-in-law suddenly grabbed my hand and dragged me to my room. I screamed and shouted, but he didn't listen. I felt like I was about to lose my dignity. I closed my eyes in fear and started pleading with him. Just then, something shocking happened. Before my father-in-law could do anything to me, my husband came home and saw everything with his own eyes. After that, my husband seemed to go into a state of shock. He didn't say anything to me or his father. I kept crying, but he didn't even try to comfort me. When he finally snapped out of it, he took me to my mother's house and left me there. Seeing my condition, my mother became extremely worried. When she asked me what had happened, I finally told her everything. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. I was terrified that my husband might have misunderstood me. I knew my father-in-law was skilled at twisting stories. After all, he was my husband's father. Why would my husband believe me over him? I kept calling and messaging my husband, but he didn't answer. He didn't want to talk to me. I was deeply distressed, not knowing what to do. My mother tried to console me, saying, "Your husband is very sensible. He won't make any rash decisions. Don't worry about him." Her words gave me temporary relief, but soon my thoughts would spiral again. Many days passed, and I was almost losing hope when, suddenly, my husband came to pick me up. He looked exhausted and drained. He took me to a small flat. I was shocked and asked him why he had brought me there. He told me, "From now on, you'll live here." I was stunned. "Who will take care of your father at home?" I asked. He replied, "I've arranged my father's marriage to a widow. She will take care of him now. You don't need to worry about him anymore." Hearing this, my heart felt at ease. I used to stay worried all the time, thinking about how I would protect myself from my father-in-law's shadow. But now my husband had made things easier for me. My big problem was solved, and no amount of gratitude felt enough. Then I told my husband, "I found out about your father that day when I saw the videos of you and me on his phone. Your father would charge his phone in the room and leave the camera on. Everything we did was being recorded, and he would watch it later." Hearing this, my husband closed his eyes in pain. He said, "I could never have imagined that my father could do such a thing. I never thought I'd feel this level of shame because of him. It's unfortunate that he didn't respect his age or the sanctity of relationships. But from now on, don't bring this up again. Forget whatever happened. Let's start our life anew from this point." I smiled and placed my hand on his. We were living in a small flat now, and I felt a sense of relief and hope for the future.